India is going to be no one's B team. And that was something that at some point the Americans had to reconcile with. They haven't, and it's a loud expression of that. And I think we will be the first strategic partnership where both the partners are more than $10 trillion. It's never happened before. And that's why you're seeing such a loud negotiation.
We have thousands of Somalis at the moment attending universities in India,
That's right.
going to hospitals in India. We have hundreds of thousands of Somalis in North America and Europe. In fact, our diaspora sends more money in the form of remittance than we receive in the form of development assistance, $1.7 billion. And even that aspect of globalization and its discontent is being questioned now, the idea of immigration.
What was the weight of China in the world economy in the year 2000 was around 6%. It tripled to today, 18%. If you put at the weight in GDP in the world economy of the emerging Asian countries, which include China, which includes India, which includes other countries, it doubled to 33%, a third of the world economy now. That was a very different situation only 25 years ago.
Good morning, and greetings from a cloudy and traffic-clogged New York City. It's a delight to be here with the Blockbuster panel. My name is Ishan Tharoor. I'm a columnist at the Washington Post, and we're joined here today, as I said, by a Blockbuster panel at the World Economic Forum, SDIM. Just a quick preface. For our audience joining us online, please join the conversation and please use the hashtag SDIM25 as we discuss perhaps the most important questions of this political moment. We're gathered here in the shadow of the United Nations meetings. The UN is marking its 80th, has marked its 80th birthday this year, and it's showing its age. We're at a moment now in the international order where uncertainty is mounting, where fractures are showing, where the UN, the UN system is under assault in various ways and facing numerous challenges, both geopolitically and financially. We're at a moment now, of course, where the world's greatest power is acting differently on the world stage than it did before, and we're confronted by sprawling conflicts across the world, sprawling trade wars as well. So to think through the disruptions of the moment, we have four great panelists from four parts of the world. Sitting in Washington where I'm based, it often feels that we're present at the destruction of something right now, but are we also present at the creation of something new? And so to talk through that, I'm joined by the Deputy Prime Minister of Somalia, Salah Jama, Executive Secretary of ECLAC, the UN's European Economic Commission on Latin America and the Caribbean, José Manuel Salazar-Xirinachs, the distinguished former US diplomat, Victoria Nuland, and President of the Observer Research Foundation, Samir Saran, based in New Delhi. Tori and Samir are also heads of the Global Council for the Future of Geopolitics at the Forum. And so to begin, I'd love to give each of you the floor to offer our audience a guide to how do you look through the uncertainty of the moment. As I gave a bit of a preamble here, we're in a moment of incredible disruption and uncertainty. How do you look through it? So I think Deputy Prime Minister, Your Excellency, I'd like you to start the conversation.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here with these very distinguished members. I am the Deputy Prime Minister of Somalia, a nation that has been on the back foot for some time in the past, but has been increasingly emerging out of its state fragility and failure of the 90s and 2000s. As most of you are probably aware of, Somalia is now one of the non-permanent members of the Security Council. We have been going through a massive process of state building, re-establishing the national institutions, improving our economy. We just completed our HIPC initiative, debt relief process. We're part of the East African community. We're having increased bilateral relations with different countries and increasingly playing our role in the international system. But we are now a bit surprised by the increased level of uncertainty in the geopolitics, which certainly has a lot more bearing on countries like Somalia or the African continent than it would impact others. Any conflict in the region or around the world any disturbance in the global supply lines, such as the Bab el-Mandab or the Red Sea area, has a very profound impact on our citizens, because we tend to import about 70% of our food from outside. So whatever transpires in Ukraine, in the oceans, has a direct economic impact on our societies, which affects the cohesion and the stability of the region. So for us, we are firm believers in multilateralism, and we hope that multilateralism and a rule-based world order would be to the benefit of all. And we are also in a very turbulent region called the Horn of Africa, or the Bab el-Mandab, which has been at the forefront of climate change, domestic conflicts, and regional conflicts. So for us, we are seeking stability both at home and abroad, as our president's motto during his elections was Somalia, that is at peace with itself and at peace with the rest of the world. And finally, we are also at the front line of the war on terror. We are fighting one of the most potent extremist groups, terrorist groups in the world, actually. And as we fight off that very potent enemy, the support we get from the United States of America, from our European allies, and from others, Turkey and our Arab allies, was of vital importance. So if other developments disrupt the supply of support, both in moral and material support, it really has a profound impact on our ability to revive our state and to contribute to stability and control migration and other trends. So we are a bit keenly following the uncertain nature of geopolitics of today and the declining role of multilateral institutions like the UN. And we are for a much more cooperative and collective effort to resolve global issues that have bearing on the citizens and the countries in the front lines of many of these global issues.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. You've really billboarded some key issues that I think we'd like to flesh out in the remaining time we have together, in the question of multilateralism in this current moment, some of the global problems that don't have national solutions, climate change being chief among them, and the ways in which Somalia and your neighbors are at the front lines of both the turbulence of geopolitics and also a warming planet. We're seeing in Sudan the horrors there. So we will thank you for helping us sort of get this going. Executive Secretary, could I turn to you? You wear multiple hats. You're, of course, a former minister in the Costa Rican government. You're based in Chile, Santiago. And you speak for Latin America and this part of the world. But you're also a UN official. Could you tell us right now, give a sense of how the UN is doing? And you know, there is anxiety about funding. There's anxiety about its mission. There's paralysis in the Security Council, of course. How's the UN doing, and what can we expect from these meetings this week and going forward in the months to come?
Yes. Well, first of all, let me say that it's an honor. Thank you very much for the invitation and to be in this distinguished panel and with the WEF. Look, if I may put just a brief comment for context before answering your question, or trying to answer your question, is that I think, yeah, this panel is about the uncertainty, about the new conditions in geopolitics, but I think, you know, just a reflection on the nature, the sources of uncertainty, because, you know, uncertainty came with the financial crisis in 2008-9, uncertainty came with the pandemic, uncertainty comes when, you know, there's a high inflation in the world, lower growth, I mean, many sources, and of course, with threats to peace or wars. All those are sources of uncertainty. But I think what we are living now, and this is important, it's important to understand the predicament of the United Nations, is that the uncertainty at the moment, a major source, or one additional source, is a change in the behavior of the major powers. And this is also related with geoeconomic change, which is not just geopolitical. What is the geoeconomic change? Well, it's one that has happened relatively slowly. You can say it has happened very fast as well. And it's the fact that, for instance, if you see what was the weight of China in the world economy in the year 2000 was around 6%. It tripled to today, 18%. If you put at the weight in GDP in the world economy of the emerging Asian countries, which include China, which includes India, which includes other countries, it doubled to 33%, a third of the world economy. Now that was a very different situation. Only 25 years ago. So in a way, it depends how you want to assess the 25-year period. Now, that is a fundamental change in the structure of the world economy, in the weight of major powers and emerging economies and so on. Now, one cannot be deterministic and say, oh, okay, so that determines that this and that happens. Then you come to the other part of the conversation, which is, what are the responses of the previously established powers? What is the response of the United States? What is the response of Europe? What is the response of other emerging economies, of Latin America, etc.? And that it was takes to the new source of uncertainty now, which is the responses of the major powers, particularly the United States, is very, very different from what has been the policies of the United States in the last 80 years or 75 years. And well, I don't think I have to enter into describing it because, it's a lot of literature, a lot of commentary every day about it. But it's, of course, a big change. You mentioned it. The Deputy Prime Minister mentioned it. I mean, perhaps a major change is two things. There is less respect for rules. There is less commitment to rules. In the previous scenario, the major powers would voluntarily in fact, they would promote the rules themselves. The United States was the leader of a world, where the rules were obeyed, respected, out of self-interest. It wasn't not just altruism, but because, that's a way of promoting peace, of promoting cooperation. And that goes together with giving an important role for the United Nations and full multilateral institutions to cooperate within that framework of rules. That was the whole philosophy. There are other elements, of the world that's now transitioning in a world where there's more unilateral actions, where there's more instrumentalization of interdependencies. Let me say about another easy, quick way, not easy, difficult, but quick way of describing is that we are changing from a world where we trusted interdependence. In the period of hyper-globalization, not only we trusted, everybody celebrated interdependence. Now there is a big mistrust. Now there is, economic interdependence is seen, depending with whom, as a source of tremendous vulnerability, even a security threat. So that's an enormous change. That's an enormous change. So perhaps later on I would like to talk a bit about Latin America, because from the point of view of Latin America, I think the big questions, and many other countries, also Africa and so on, is how, do you position, how do you understand? It's crucial to understand this. What's the best behavior to maximize development, economic growth and so on under these new conditions? Now, United Nations. Look, I'm going to be very brief because that's a very, very difficult question. We will see what happens this week. I think that the sources perhaps of optimism, very strong optimism, is that the great majority of countries continue very committed. We just heard from the Deputy Prime Minister of Somalia, to a multilateral system, to international cooperation and so on. And that's very, very hopeful. But there are some major players that are not necessarily in that line. So, what will happen? Also, there is a financial reduction. It's a situation, it's not the first time the United Nations goes through this, but certainly is a time of very unique characteristics. So that's a big question. We will see what happens this week.
Thank you. Thank you for definitely handling my question. And Tori, if I could turn to you, I think we have to address one of these major players, as the Executive Secretary said. The Trump administration has gutted USAID, which has had huge trickle-down effects on the UN system and the international humanitarian system as well. It's pulling funding from a host of other bodies at the UN, from peacekeeping and elsewhere. It seems to have turned its back on the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. How damaging is this in your view? And what do you see the American role in the world's most preeminent multilateral body starting to look like now? And what kind of presence is the US at the UN?
Well, we'll obviously see tomorrow, Ishan, when President Trump comes and gives his first UN speech of his second term. I think it's important to go back to first principles, though. The UN was born out of the ashes of 2 world wars, which emerged because we were living in a dog-eat-dog, might makes right type of a planet, which is obviously more typical for human history than the period we've lived over the last 80 years. But it didn't result in peace, stability, or prosperity for the great powers, and certainly not for countries caught between the elephants. So, you know, I think what President Trump has said is that system where U.S. Generosity, stability, security, support for rules, support for multilateral cooperation was not a good deal for us, that somehow we were taken advantage of, there were too many free riders, et cetera. I profoundly disagree with that personally, but what he's done is said, we've got to take care of ourselves first, everybody else, good luck to you. I think the question becomes, it's easy to destroy. It's easy to say, we're not going to be generous in our development assistance anymore, we're not going to, you know, be undergirding a free and open global trading system or a free and open way for humans to live, and supporting those countries that want to be democracies, that are working so hard against terror, against climate change, et cetera. But what replaces it? And I think at this moment we're in the destruction phase. Is the president going to give an affirmative vision tomorrow about how we work together? I don't think in this interdependent world that we have all built, that so many countries have gotten more prosperous, more hopeful in, is going to last if the United States is leading simply a destruction and not a new construction, which is not to say that the system's been perfect, far from it. I mean, the high point of the UN was, remember, in the 90s when we appeared to have convergence among the P5 nations at least, that a more open, more democratic, more rules-based system was good for everybody. That was China as well, as it was opening its economy. That was Russia in the period of before Putin. But now the fundamental dissatisfaction of too many countries, and specifically 3 out of the 5 of the P5, are causing questions. So I'd like to hear what President Trump is going to propose as an alternative here. But I worry that we will bring ourselves back to a period not simply of fighting each other on the trade front, not addressing global challenges, not setting good normative rules for things, new technologies coming on like crypto and AI and these kinds of things, but that we might actually walk ourselves back to the brink of great power conflict if we're not talking and managing all of these challenges together.
Thanks, Tori. So given this emerging narrative now of great power competition, Samir, from your perspective, I know ORF does a lot of work on the sidelines of major Global South forums, including the BRICS. What does the emerging international order look like to you now? Is it one of uncertainty? Is it one of opportunity? How do you see things, and how, from your view, do you look beyond the uncertainty?
Look, the international order is now an orphan. Parents have disowned it. So those who build the order no longer want any ownership over that order. And I think that's the fundamental truth. It's not necessarily a bad thing. So let me go back to your first, when you were opening this conversation, you said, is it a moment of building something new, or is it a moment of destruction? And I think it's both. So let's be honest here. What we've been fearing has happened. And I don't think we should now hold on to any illusion that there's still anything remaining in the order that existed post the big wars up till now. What has really happened is that the country that underwrote that particular order, namely the United States of America, and by the way, this is over the last few administrations, has systematically dismantled every element of that international order. And of course, the current Trump presidency is, which is basically drawing all the attention. But this process has been unfolding, and we have been writing about it. We've been speaking about it. It's not the first time that we've been discussing the demise of the UN at the World Economic Forum. We've been discussing this over the last decade in some sense. So I think this has been a decadal process, and we are coming to the close of one chapter. And I think what is really now happening is the beginning of something new. So what is happening? What is happening is that the big guys have the guns out and are now asserting their power and influence. So you are seeing visibly that those with the means to exert influence are doing so, using whatever is available at their disposal, firepower, financial power, technology power, whatever is available, it's being now deployed to, in many ways, make new space for themselves or preserve the old space that they had. One of the two. So I think that's happening, and it's happening across regions. It's not about just the US. All with means today are using those means to create a rather partisan space for themselves. I think that's the one truth. The second, what is most visible is the United States and its tariff negotiations with the world. What is not that visible is that the other parts of the world are also talking to themselves. There is also a negotiation happening between other actors, and I think you mentioned so, that the middle powers of today are very different to the middle powers of 1945. And I think in 1 year's time, you will suddenly come to realize that the world has a very different view than what we are thinking it looks like today. Today, it's all Trump or his way or no way. In 1 year's time, you will see there will be a whole mushrooming of alternatives where you will have these regional and like-minded groups working together on different kind of projects. Could be connectivity, could be climate, could be energy, could be regional finance and development ideas. But others are also talking to themselves. So we are having negotiations en masse. Countries are in many ways finding new ways of clustering up or creating new cohorts of purpose. Companies are doing that as well. Civil societies is also doing that. And the third thing that we are, of course, noticing is that many of the terms and the iconographies of the previous era no longer are valid. Terrorism, for example, someone mentioned terror. You mentioned terror, Prime Minister. Very interesting. It's now very difficult for us to actually label folks with the simplicity of the last century. You don't know who's the head of state and who's the terrorist. You don't know who's going to be your political ally and who's the one you're going to be shooting at in the fields of West Asia. It is a complicated new century with a whole new vocabulary that is underway. I am most worried about three things. I think what really held all of us together in the last 70, 80 years while things were going well was, of course, multilateral institutions. And I think we have literally taken a kitchen sink and gone at them. So I think multilateral institutions and their health today is feeble, to put it mildly. I think they are in the critical care unit, and we need to at least from an emerging country perspective, from an Asian, African, Latin American perspective, we have to preserve some of the units of the UN that did seminal work on development, on gender, on education, on rights and children and many other aspects. So while the Security Council has been defunct for a while, some of the agencies did really good work and really had credible impact in many of our places. And I hope the middle powers are now willing to loosen their purse strings and are able to fund many of these institutions so that they can continue to provide development. So that's one thing. So I'm worried about the multilateral institutions, and we need new champions and new equity ownership of many of these institutions so that they can continue to deliver. The second is the multinationals. Mm-hmm. They're dead. With the offboarding of Russia, with the cancellation of political opponents, with the choice of countries you want online and you don't want online, basically you are either an American company or a Chinese company or a Korean company or a Japanese company or an Indian company. It's the end of multinationals. Transnational companies were immune to political swings in national capitals. They continued to connect. The telephones kept ringing even when we were in the midst of the big wars. You could call up the phone and ask for a ceasefire. When you cut off people in the digital world and you cancel them through all digital communications, you have actually walked back on what kept the world connected in the past. So the point I'm trying to say is that multinationals played a role of connecting the world, of moderating the extremities of politics. They are no longer actors. They are now political instruments and what has really happened in that famous dinner in the White House is what Xi Jinping did to his capitalists. That is exactly what happened in Washington, D.C., that you don't have a transnational, multinational class anymore. You have national enterprises, American enterprises serving American interests. And the final point, academia, education, big connector. I mean, look at the way the African students in UK and Paris and the US, both the coasts and elsewhere, were instrumental in ensuring that as countries rose, they were able to have a same spectrum of thinking, of development, of leadership, of progress, right? Because the base was common. Now, when you target universities, when you target students, when you target the movement of human beings, the way that they are being, you're destroying the last glue of globalization. Now, if all of us are going to be living in our own tribal conclaves or enclaves, you will necessarily see the end of the requirement of any body such as the one that we have in the city.
Thank you, Samir, that you put a lot on the table there. Deputy Prime Minister, I'd like you to respond perhaps to an element of the vision that Samir laid out, this one where the international order is an orphan, where in a certain context now we can hope for other countries, middle powers, to coalesce on certain issues, a kind of geopolitical free-for-all, but also still we'll see spaces for cooperation, for dialogue. You mentioned, of course, that Somalia is very connected to and perhaps reliant on the influence and the aid of foreign governments. You have Turkey playing a big role in Somalia. You have the Gulf countries invested in various parts of your country. You have a long-standing U.S. security presence. What's the ideal scenario for you in this context? I mean, for Somalia's interests, what's the ideal international order?
Well, for us, as I stated in my previous opening remarks, our modus operandi has been to resolve our internal issues and have healthy relationship with the world out there. We are a nation located at a very strategic place, a trading route. In fact, we have thousands of Somalis at the moment attending universities in India.
That's right.
Going to hospitals in India. Throughout Asia, from Malaysia to India and elsewhere. We have hundreds of thousands of Somalis in North America and Europe. Our relationship with the outside world, in fact, our diaspora sends more money in the form of remittance than we receive in the form of development assistance, $1.7 billion. Mm-hmm. And even that aspect of globalization and its discontent, as Jeffrey Sachs or maybe others would say, is being questioned now, the idea of immigration. Right. Frankly speaking, these international institutions were a product and a creation of the Western world. They were inspired by their ideals of the day and their interests of the day also. Africa's relationship with the rest of the world has never been the healthiest one. And surely we might be at the receiving end even if this system collapses in so many ways. But I don't know how worse off we would be. I'll give you some statistics. Africa contributes to less than 2% of global trade. It contributes to less than 2% or 1% of manufactured goods. Yet on every aspect of human capital, young population, natural resources, rare earth minerals, oil, it has a great deal of abundance in every aspect of it. Yet it has not been, despite our firm belief in internationalism and multilateralism, from the 60s when most of these African countries became independent states till today, and we don't have to factor in a period of colonialism and all that legacy, which is very well documented. We have been at the receiving end of international trade, relationships, and geopolitics. And mind you, much of this, if you trace many of the conflicts in Africa, you can trace it back to geopolitics of the day, either in a bipolar world or a multipolar world, as one would say now. And I actually beg to differ with those that say that the current lapse in international, or rather multilateralism, and the failure of the UN starts with this current US administration. I believe the decay, the cracks, and the failure can be noticed from way back. I mean, Gaza and Ukraine and Sudan are only the most recent manifestations. But the international system has been ailing, and I must agree with my friend here that the ideals and the principles of multilateralism, liberal democracy, where what was the glue that was keeping together. In the 90s, when we thought the world was having a convergence of ideals, but now it is apparently becoming very clear that there are emerging localities of power, of economic relations, and of interdependency. However, there is a consensus among most pragmatic and sane actors in the world that everybody is better off by dealing with each other and addressing. There are some issues that do not affect the Somalis or the Africans alone. Climate change, global economic decline, pandemics, all tell us how vulnerable we are and how we need to pool our resources and thinking together. In our case, we are facing a war against Al-Shabaab. But Al-Shabaab is not our creation. International terrorism, either those that appeal to political Islam in a wrong way than we Muslims believe in, and other actors who, because terrorism has economic dimension, it has political considerations, it has ideological underpinnings. The fight that's happening in Somalia is a fight both for Somalis and for the rest of the world. That is where we appreciate the support that we get from our partners in protecting our seas, in trying to fight off Al-Shabaab. But that war is a global war. And we certainly appreciate the role that the support we received in the past, and we're hoping that it will continue. Otherwise, it will be very consequential. We have a peacekeeping mission now in Somalia. It used to be called AMSOM, and now it's called AUSOM, where at the peak of its time, it was 22,000 African peacekeeping troops. Now it's about 11,000. But now, currently as we speak, we are really trying to collect resources so that we can continue the mission for some more time. In the absence of multilateralism and support from others, sustaining such missions becomes a very difficult task. But in a world where people are trying to look to regional solutions, I think we should always uphold the principles that hold of us all together as humans, because in the era of AI and future pandemics and whatnot may come our way, I think codependency is the best way, and the interdependency that is both right-based and beneficial to all of us. But for countries that are dealing with fragility and vulnerabilities in the first place, a polarized world where, as he framed it, the fight of the elephants could certainly hurt those who have very little to do with that fight in so many ways.
Sure.
But and our voice is to respect multilateralism and create an international order that is right-based. By appealing for the previous order doesn't mean that it was perfect. It means it needed to be improved. But abandoning it, I don't think it serves anybody, the strongest or the emerging one.
Excellent point, well taken. Shifting to you, Executive Secretary, you spoke not long ago, I believe, on the need for Latin America to diversify its interests in the face of Trump's tariffs, the trade wars being unleashed, and a kind of new age gunboat diplomacy that we're seeing in the region carried out by Washington. Could you speak a bit more about how Latin America is reacting to this America First administration?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And also, we at ECLAC are producing, recommendations and thinking about this. One of the traditions of the value added that ECLAC has had throughout the years is thinking in terms of the development challenges of the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of the world system. I mean, the whole center-periphery model of Mr. Prebisch was so successful because it was a conceptualization of what was the center, what was the periphery, how were the relationships, and so on. And also the theory of economic dependence of the 60s and 70s was a version, a different version of the same thing. So now we're also very much thinking about that. And I think, you know, from where we were left now, there are many centers and many peripheries, to use the term. Now it's a multipolar world, and as you said, Samir, you know, this is emerging and this is going to continue. The figures are there. I mentioned, by the way, I didn't mention, I forgot to say that then the proportion of GDP of the United States came down to from around 22, 21% to 15, and Europe also 15, and China is 18. Depends how you measure these things, but it's a huge change anyway. So the world will have to learn. And this is the thing, we hopefully it will learn without too much pain, to live in a different balance of power. You know, I recently reread, you know, Henry Kissinger's book on world order, which I recommend because, you know, it's very wise. And he was referring to the Peace of Westphalia, you know, in Europe, and how it took, you know, it was managing the equilibrium between different powers. It was successful for several decades, but ended up in the First World War. So, I mean, the main thing is to ensure that this doesn't end up in any kind of war, you know, between great powers, which would be a disaster, absolutely disaster scenario. And then for that, you have to manage equilibrium. And this is the danger of seeing everything like a, you know, a power game and spheres of influence and weaponization of whatever, you know, interdependence in general. Okay, Latin America. Now, having said all of this, there are opportunities. But one thing I think is very important to say, and we are saying it to governments and as a reflection, countries are going to continue to have to grow. Countries depend on energy, oil, non-renewables, the energy transition, you know, lithium, batteries. We have technological revolutions. All this ends up, and frankly, a central part of the rivalry is production, industrial, technological rivalry. Now, that conversation, in terms of the economic growth and the development strategies of countries, is a conversation about specific sectors. Like Chile, for instance, which is one of the countries which is blessed by nature, having a lot of minerals. Also Peru, also several South American countries. The conversation around strategic minerals, around lithium, and all, which is in high demand, and everything says it will be in much higher demand, copper. Also, Latin America has other assets like biodiversity, you know, the Amazon, where several countries are working on it, and so how to protect that. And of course, the biggest asset is always the human resources, and this is why education is so important. So even within this kind of bleak scenario, I mean, the conversation has now turned. A lot of the new diplomacy is going to have to be not like just the general free trade agreements, macroeconomic and so on, and let the private sector do whatever. It is now a conversation between governments, the private sector, everybody talking about sectors, because this is the strategic sector, and actually the great powers are negotiating around where do they buy, where do they access, can they have mines here and there and so on. That's, you know, if one puts the economic hat, and I work for the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, this is the change of game. The conversation, the international diplomacy is now diplomacy, very much so. It's also about peace and about humanitarian situation, but in terms of development, it's about specific sectors. How do you manage that? Can you do business with this company, with that company? Multinationals, very good point. Now, multinationals come with a nationality, with a flag, and that creates a problem. So that is part of the conversation that countries have to. I mean, it is not possible to think about industrial policy and productive development policies in any developing countries, not just in Latin America, without having a very clear picture of the opportunities, the restrictions. But there are many opportunities. There are many opportunities to do business. But going back to the big picture, hopefully, and as you know, the United Nations, and going back to the multilateral system, has three pillars: a humanitarian pillar, a development pillar, and a peace and security pillar. And they are very, very interconnected. You know, and if countries do not develop, if there is no hope for high growth, for better employment, for more prosperity, people become angry, and you go to extremes and so on. So that threatens security and even peace. So this is why, perhaps I'd like to end on that note, the multilateral system is more important than ever in this situation, if I may say.
Could I, you know, it would be remiss of me, Samir, not to ask you a bit about the U.S.-India relationship right now. I mean, we're talking about the world's oldest democracy, the world's largest democracy. For successive administrations, there's been a desire for closeness and for deepening alliance. But now that seems to have been thrown into a huge loop. How are you processing some of the Trump administration's moves? We are a bit short on time.
I know. So look, I'll keep it short because this is a matter for another discussion completely. But I think it'll be fair to say that we are in the process of a very loud negotiation from one end and a very stoic response from the other end. So we are facing a loud negotiator and a stoic respondent, and it's exactly this. It's a negotiation of terms of the future, and I think I'm glad it is happening. I think there was a easy assumption in the US that an American-India partnership would resemble an American-UK, American-Germany, American-French partnership. India is going to be no one's B team. And that was something that at some point the Americans had to reconcile with. They haven't, and it's a loud, expression of that. Indians were under the assumption that somehow Americans were going to continue to underwrite India's growth because somehow rise of India was in American interest, and that was the American assumption. That is not the case. It has to be very clear-cut deliverables India has to give and some returns on investment that must be available to the US. So I think, like everything else in the world today which is being renegotiated, this fundamental relationship is also under a renegotiation, and I'm quite convinced whether under Trump in first year, second year, third year, after we have broken our heads finding every other option, we'll come back together and work together. And I think we will be the first strategic partnership where both the partners are more than $10 trillion. It's never happened before. And that's why you're seeing such a loud negotiation. Because America has never engaged with a country bigger than it in population and likely to be bigger than it in economic size in the next 25, 30 years. It has never dealt with a country, that phenomenon. We haven't either. So it's a very new era for us. It had to happen at some point. It's happening now. But end of the day, I truly believe we will be together sooner rather than later, as brothers in arms, but certainly not in a marriage that ties United Kingdom to the US or anyone else.
India is going to surpass Japan as the third largest economy at the end of this decade.
I think that's
in the world.
That's a natural progression. But I think the point I'm making here is that it's not just about economic size. Mm-hmm. It's about the fact that America has a unique attribute, and sorry, Tori, I'm saying this in front of you, you've been a diplomat. America has funded every side of every conflict in the last 80 years. They've never chosen one party in any single location. They have been involved with all. They've been an exceptional actor.
We could have a good fight about that.
I'm giving you an outside perspective, so with limited understanding. But the point I'm trying to say is America has been an exceptional global actor for it having certain rules for itself and different for others. And certain countries believe that they enjoy that exceptionalism as well. And that's what's really happening here. I truly believe that it's going to end, hopefully soon. I'm worried about how long is the tail of this episode going to infect the optimism on both sides. And I think that's how soon can we go back to business as usual even after the episode has subsided will depend on how much damage you do during the episode. So I'm positive. By the way, let me just tell you this also. We do surveys every year. We are not part of the P5. We are not necessarily the single largest gainer of the UN as well. That's been China, or the global trading system. That's been China. So we are not we don't necessarily have to have the view that Indian youngsters have. I do a youth survey where we poll youngsters from across the country, and overwhelming, they vote for the United Nations and multilateralism. India is a multilateralism first country. We believe in multilateralism. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is something that is ingrained in our DNA. We don't know anything else. We don't know the side deals and bilateral deals. We will be part of the global south. We will have Western orientation in some of our scientific and institutional architectures. We will have a very Eastern view on some of our social and cultural moorings. We are a complex and storied civilization, and we bring all of it to our table.
So, Tori, Samir has just given us a species of optimism here. In the last minutes, I'll let you conclude our discussion. Could you look ahead in the coming months and maybe a year from now? What do you think we'll be seeing? I mean, this is obviously a pretty speculative question, but is the post-American world going to emerge even more? I mean, wrap this up for us.
Well, I don't know about coming months or coming year, but like Samir, I'm an optimist, and I'm an optimist because I think that, as we've discussed here, there are too many constituencies with agency and with a need to solve their problems together. I agree with Samir that India and the US are better together than they are separately, and that the alternatives for either one of us are less good. But I think the question is whether what's been said here, regional powers who want to support an open, free system, who want to support free trade, whether it's business, and I disagree with you. I understand that, you know, there's a perception out there that U.S. companies are being press-forced into being American only. One of the greatest constituencies for a more interdependent global world, a more open system, rules, in fact, are the great American companies. And I think they're making that point. Do not throw out the baby with the bathwater. We're going to be the ones who suffer the most. That said, the question is, are other countries going to lead in defending the system, in providing the humanitarian aid that we're not providing, in providing, working together on norms, in setting the example of free trade benefits more than parasitic trade? And then are we going to have to reconsider? And interestingly, the American people, through a survey of the Reagan Institute of all places, are massively in favor, 80%, including Republicans and self-identifying MAGA Republicans, in deep U.S. engagement in the world. So we can work to fix the system, we can work to deliver for more people better, but throwing it all out is going to impoverish us, I think. And I do think it's a matter of whether countries like India and Somalia and the great democracies of Latin America and of Asia and of Africa stand up and say, this system benefits more of us and it'll benefit you, and we will move on and leave you in your little corner and stand up to you if you're going to be parasitic and protect the system. But that requires folks saying, no, this benefits us and it'll benefit you if you stay with it.
Well, thank you, Tori. I suppose, you know, this is a conversation we could have had for another 45 minutes, and we would still be mulling and chewing over a lot of the great uncertainties of the moment. But I'm really grateful to this terrific panel for talking through the questions of the age, for perhaps giving a bit more certainty in this cloud of uncertainty. And I thank you all in the audience for joining us, and have a great day.